Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. I was thinking about the 80-20 rule and what's going on with it. I mentioned that yesterday. And there seems to be a correlation between leftist strongholds and the 80-20 rule. And it kind of correlates to both education and law enforcement. Now, what is the 80-20 rule? Think about it in terms of this. For every 100 people in law enforcement or in the classroom, 80% of them will do exactly what they're told, will not look back, will not ask questions. They will do exactly what they're told. That means that they will always follow orders no matter what. Now, what does that mean? That means that when things get sporting and it's oppressive, these people will side on the rule of the law, no matter how just or how wrong it is. Now, why is that a problem? Well, we lived through one of the stupidest eras in history when it came to the COVID nonsense and everything else that was associated with that. But there's a new report that came out that highlights this. From Firearms News, there's a new ATF report aims at the same old disarmament goals. So let me save you make this brief for you. What it basically says is that there's an agenda that's started by like the George Soros crowd that goes very hard and heavy at disarmament. And they always do this in the same vein as they do crime reform or prison reform. So what happens is what we're seeing now. We see large leftist strongholds like LA, like New York City, like Albuquerque, where there's a catch and release program for criminals. And with that catch and release program, it spikes crime. Well, when crime gets spiked, the first thing they do is say, well, we need to disarm citizens who have done nothing, law-abiding citizens, because that'll fix the problem. They're not looking at where guns come from. In this report, they talk about the ATF's report, the annual crime statistic report that comes out. And one of the things they've done, if you haven't heard about this with the ATF and the FBI's crime statistics, is they've pulled self-defense use of firearms out of the reports because it was too favorable to us in the 2A. What they do, however, is they conflate the crime statistics and they conflate how rapidly guns are getting from sale back into the crime, or let me rephrase that because that's not correct. When you purchase a gun, or when someone purchases a gun, the time it takes from that point until it ends up in a crime. Now, this, for most law-abiding citizens, is not a thing. But in LA, they were saying that it's shortened dramatically from where it was, 10 years ago. And if you look at it, those stats are correct, but they also look at the wrong thing. And let me explain. They're showing the stats have decreased, so the time between any of those types of situations happening is decreasing. But why is that? There's two factors here. Gun ownership is at the highest it has ever been in the United States. There are now more guns than there are people that would wield them in the United States. So a lot of those are black rifles, so I think they make up a more than common use case now for why you should back the hell off the black rifle in general, especially the AR-15 or the Kalashnikov, because neither of those are going away. But what it was saying specifically about this stuff is that crime is going up accordingly. Well, if you look at what's happening in each one of those scenarios, in each one of those cities that they're taking these sample sizes for these reports, what you notice is a correlation of there's a district attorney that gets in who lowers the crime stats, the conviction rates, because that is a political agenda. Then you see a spike in crime. Then you see them go after rights. And it's one for one. Everywhere it happens, or everywhere we see these pushes for unconstitutional gun bans, this happens as a cookie cutter plan. It is what leftists and the Democrats, I hate to say it because I'm really kind of becoming very anti-party. As much as it sounds like I'm still a strong conservative, I'm not, because I don't trust them either. Specifically, the Trump man, the orange man, he's the one that banned bump stocks, and we're still having to fight that stuff. He's the only one, even between Barack Obama and Bush, that actually got some gun control done, was Donald Trump. So if you're an absolutist like I am, Donald Trump isn't necessarily a good guy. So what we go back to is this leftist agenda, and you see it in New Mexico specifically. You see district attorneys catching and releasing. You see bail reform. And then you see a corresponding crime increase, and we wonder why. And in our largest cities, where the largest population centers are in New Mexico, that any correlation between crime, what's happening in crime, is very noticeable, because you'll see it exponentially versus where you would see it like in Farmington, where I live. What's interesting about that is we're seeing a crime rate increase in Farmington. And you have to ask yourself why. And it's because of what has been going on at the state level where it comes to bail reform and prison reform. Now, I'm for both of these, okay, but not in a party platform type of way. What I mean is there always has to be a path to redemption for someone who's went to jail, for them to have learned their lesson and get their rights back so that they can become integrated back into the to American citizens. Otherwise, they're locked into a system that's never going to let them out, and that creates more issues. When it comes to bail reform, I'm also for this too, but again, not in the incarnation that it came out as. Think about it. There's a lot of poor people that were minding their own damn business when some agent of the state got them in the system and got them for something. In today's day and age, you have to look at the laws that are on the books and wonder, why are they there? Some of them are very not necessary. They're very egregious. I'm not even going to try to say the word because I can say it in my head, but I can't get it out on it with my voice. But they're very boastful, very large, very ham-fisted is the best way to put it. You look at someone who's first-time offender for anything. Should they have a book thrown at them that dramatically changes their life forever without no path to redemption? That this will always be forever a stain on their life, their career, their record, whatever. I don't believe that should be the case. Again, there has to be a redemption arc to get people back into the system. Otherwise, back into society, that is, not the system. Otherwise, what we do is we end up having an endless cycle that we're seeing in the country. That 80-20 rule, where 80% of the people will follow the rules and 20% will say, no, they're stupid. I think that's more aligned than what I was willing to admit to back when I was a pure statist working for the state. And what I mean by that is I always thought it would be like 95 or 98% would stand up and say no versus the 2% that were just the zealots that would do whatever they were told to no matter what. In fact, it's the other way around. And our society has fostered this to a great deal with the education system. There's a very, very cool viral TikTok, and I'm not a fan of TikTok because they're Chinese in origin, and it's not because they're Chinese, it's because the data they're giving back to them, to the Chinese state, to the CCP, can be used for analytics to determine how to control people. And if you don't believe me, Facebook knows when you have to poo. So they know everything. And giving them more information is probably not a good plan. And what's even worse is TikTok or ByteDance, that's the actual company that owns it in China. They are infiltrated by the CCP, and they are used by the CCP. And there's two different algorithms. One that is for domestic audiences, and one is for foreign audiences. And the domestic one encourages families, encourages the science, the arts. The one for foreign audiences is kind of depraved. But where I was going with this is there's this young lady, and she talks about a lesson in biology class where the desks were all arranged in a circle, and the teacher said, "Get in here, sit down," to all the students. "Don't move, don't talk, and then if you do, you will fail." After everybody gets sat in the circle, gets squared away, he then pulls out a goldfish in a bowl, pulls it out of the bowl, and lets it flop on the desk, and then leaves the classroom. Now, during this, nobody does anything for a while. They're afraid of doing something. And this is how most people, most statists are, especially in the education system, because I've seen this firsthand. I've been one of these guys, unfortunately, where you're too afraid to actually do anything because of the consequences they just laid out. But in this process, someone had the gumption and the spine to stand up and say, "No, got up, pick the goldfish up, put it back in its bowl," and it lived. The teacher came in and said, what has society done to you? And if there was a teacher that did this, I think, while I was in school, it would have shocked me, and they probably would have been my favorite teacher from this point on. I'm not so I know that there's 20% of those people in education that probably still do this type of thing. But there's also 80% that won't. And that 20% is pretty much getting tired and leaving because of the crap that's going on with education in general. But what that teacher said is, what have you done? What has society done to you? Think about that. You sat there and you watched something that was getting ready to perish, and you were willing to let that happen because of the consequences someone pushed down to you that really, in the grand scheme of things, have nothing to do with your life from that point forward. And that's where we're at in society. You can look at the examples in the COVID lockdowns to see exactly how that worked. You know, if you went out and conducted your life like a normal individual, it was inevitable that the government or the state would get involved in your life and try to force you back into your bubble because they didn't want you to save the goldfish, so to speak. And it's very jarring to think about that, but this is a very good example of what the state does to people. The state hates you, and if you don't believe that, look at what's happened in the last 3 years and look what they're doing. They're trying to pull away gun rights from Americans for one reason. They know that they can't make any aggressive action towards the American people as long as they're armed. There is no law enforcement agency that's large enough to go house to house in an environment where these people would be hostile actors and the American populace would see them as such. Because then you will see an insurgency the likes of which would make Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam look like a cherry bomb. Because the American people, as much as I have lost faith in a lot of the stuff that's going on in society, I still know in our heart of hearts it would take an extreme example, but they would rise to the occasion. And we've seen it before in 9/11. We've seen it before in other tragedies. We're seeing it now in East Lebanon, where you're seeing people randomly show up and start helping. There's a famous YouTuber that was there before Trump, and he was handing out cash to people. Now, he had no other way to help them, but he's handing out raw cash. Is this what it takes is for our society to stand up and start doing what we need to do, for people to see that we don't need the government needs us? The government can't exist without our consent. And for too long, we've consented. We've rolled over. And the government counts on that. All agents of the state count on that. Law enforcement, education system, the Senate, the Roundhouse in general, the Senate, the representatives, the governors, the president, they all depend on us consenting to what they're doing to us. And there's going to be a point, and there should have already been a point, that you said, no, enough's enough, we're tired, we're done. Mine was earlier, I believe, and it took me the COVID nonsense for me to really, really come to terms of what the hell I was thinking. And I say that because, like I said, I was a hardcore statist. I used to believe that our government really could never be that bad because it's the American government. We aren't the Nazis. What you're finding out now is power, ultimate power, corrupts ultimately. Absolutely. And you've seen that on both sides. And the swamp that people like to laugh at and say, well, it doesn't exist, it exists and has existed for years. It isn't what we thought it was, or what I thought it was. That swamp is the administrative state. We change congressmen and representatives and president enough that pretty much should set the tone of what's going on there. However, we don't change out their staff for those offices. People get into cabinet positions or get into high-ranking positions in the government, and they'll stay there forever until retirement. And their viewpoints become jaded or corrupt. And those are what you're seeing shaping policy, because you are who you hang out with. If you went there, and I say there, you went to Congress or the Senate or the Roundhouse with a great intent, the people around you that you surround yourself with or that they surround you with will corrupt you absolutely enough to where you absolutely have no problems doing these ham-fisted power grabs. Just so you know, our win on Senate Bill 171 and House Bill 101 is going to have repercussions. The governor's throwing a tantrum that there isn't enough gun control happening in New Mexico because of what's happened in the Roundhouse during this session, that she may call a special session. That's her threat to the floor right now, because there's a few days left, to say, you need to get more gun control going because I want it. I demand it. Not the people. The people of New Mexico have stated in no short terms that we don't want it. The so-called experts that the state has brought can't state examples of how said laws would fix criminal behavior, or how said laws would apply to criminals more so than it would apply to law-abiding citizens. The short answer is they don't. The mask has slipped off a while back, and it should be very apparent they want to disarm you. And it's our job to stand up and say, no, this has to be a line in the sand that there can't be any compromise on anymore. So that's where I'm at. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. To that end, I'm looking to do everything I can, financially, business-wise, to end prohibition for some things, and to absolutely take advantage of the state as much as they have taken advantage of me. Like, share, subscribe, be great.